The night the chains broke did not begin with courage. It began with fear so sharp it made the air taste like iron. Rain pressed down on the cotton fields, turning the earth into sucking mud that clung to bare ankles and swallowed sound. The plantation slept uneasily, its long house dark, its barns quiet, its overseer drunk somewhere behind locked doors. In the slave quarters, however, no one slept. Not truly. Breath was shallow. Bodies were still. Everyone listened for footsteps that did not come. But wait for a second before we continue towards the video. Let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. And don't forget to subscribe. In the farthest cabin, where the roof sagged and the chimney leaked smoke even when cold, two siblings sat on opposite ends of a rough wooden bench. They did not touch, they did not speak. They had learned long ago that words could betray you, that walls had ears, and that even silence could be dangerous if it looked wrong. The older sibling, Elias, kept his eyes on the door. He had a way of watching that made it seem as though nothing escaped him. Years of working in the fields, of carrying loads heavier than his body should have endured, had carved patience into his bones. He planned things quietly, carefully, too carefully, some would say. He believed survival was a puzzle that rewarded those who waited. Across from him sat his younger sister, Mara. She did not watch the door. She watched the floor, her fingers curled into fists so tight the knuckles shone pale in the firelight. Where Elias held his fear like a stone in his pocket, Mara wore hers like a blade under her tongue. She felt everything too fast, too fiercely. Anger came to her as naturally as breath. They had planned to run in 3 nights. The moon would be thin then, the patrol light, a wagon would be passing near the old creek road. Everything had been counted, measured, memorized. Then the scream came. It ripped through the quarters like a tearing cloth, high and desperate, followed by a sound that was worse than words, the crack of a whip striking flesh that had already known too much pain. Mara was on her feet instantly. Elias caught her wrist hard. "No," he mouthed. Her eyes flashed toward him, wet and furious. The scream came again, cut short this time, replaced by sobbing. Someone else cried out, a child. Elias felt the plan shatter in his mind like glass. He knew that sound. He had heard it before. Every enslaved person had. It was the sound of a lesson being taught publicly, of terror used like a tool. Mara wrenched her hand free. "They're killing him," she whispered. Elias stood. His heart hammered so loudly he feared it would give them away. He opened the door a crack. Rain and darkness rushed in. Torches flickered near the main yard, their light throwing long, twisted shadows. The overseer's voice rose, slurred and cruel. They were beating Jonah, the old man who limped, who whispered stories about places north where rivers froze and people walked free. Jonah, who had slipped Mara an extra crust of bread just that morning. Mara was already moving. Elias followed because there was no choice left. They did not think in those moments. Thought belonged to plans, and plans belonged to a past that no longer existed. They moved like hunted animals, low and fast, slipping between cabins, keeping to darkness. Someone grabbed Elias's arm as he passed, eyes wide with terror, shaking a silent plea to stay. He pulled free. Near the yard, chaos reigned. Rain turned dust to mud. Torches hissed and spat. Jonah lay on the ground, his back a ruin of blood and torn skin. The overseer raised the whip again, drunk on power and liquor. Mara screamed. It was not a loud scream, it was raw. It tore from her chest and carried every buried rage with it. The whip froze midair. Faces turned. For a heartbeat the world stopped. Then everything broke. A hand struck Mara from behind, sending her sprawling. Elias surged forward without thinking, driving his shoulder into the man's chest. Someone shouted. Someone else swung. Elias felt a blow glance off his skull, stars bursting behind his eyes. The overseer lunged for his pistol. Elias saw it happen with terrible clarity. He saw Mara on the ground, scrambling. He saw the gun coming up. He saw Jonah's eyes flutter open, glassy and resigned. He grabbed the nearest thing, a broken fence rail slick with rain, and swung. The sound it made when it connected was not loud. It was dull. Final. The overseer fell without a word. Silence crashed down, thick and heavy. Then came screams, orders, panic. "Run!" Elias shouted. Mara was already running. They did not know who fired the first shot. They only knew the sound chased them into the trees, cracking through the night like thunder. Bullets tore bark and leaves above their heads. Dogs began to bark, deep and eager. They ran barefoot into the swamp, mud swallowing their steps, rain masking their trail. Branches clawed at their faces. Thorns tore skin. Elias stumbled once, went down hard and felt pain explode in his ankle. He bit back a cry and forced himself up. Behind them torches multiplied. Voices rose in fury and fear. Someone shouted about the overseer. Another cursed Jonah. Orders were barked, leashes rattled. The dogs were released. The swamp welcomed them with cold, black water that climbed their legs and dragged at their bodies. They waded, then swam, then waded again, forcing themselves through reeds and muck that stank of rot. Elias grabbed Mara's hand when she slipped, hauled her up when the mud tried to claim her. They did not stop until their lungs burned and their muscles shook. When they finally collapsed, beneath a twisted cypress, the sounds of pursuit were closer, not farther. The dogs bayed with wild joy. Lantern light danced through trees. Mara pressed her face into the mud, silent tears mixing with rain. Elias lay on his back, staring up at a sky he could barely see through the canopy, chest heaving. "It's too soon," he whispered. Not in blame. In disbelief, Mara turned her head toward him, eyes blazing even in the dark. "Jonah's dead," she said. "If we stayed, so were we." Elias closed his eyes. He knew she was right. He also knew something worse. They would not forgive this. Not the overseer, not the plantation, not the county. A dead man with power meant blood would be demanded. A horn sounded in the distance, long and low. Elias's stomach dropped. That horn did not call farmhands. It did not call neighbors. It called hunters. By dawn there would be a price on their heads. By nightfall men would come from miles away. Men who tracked people for money. Men who bragged about their dogs and their ropes. Men who believed fear was proof of superiority. Mara reached for Elias's hand, squeezing it hard. "They won't catch us," she said, fierce and desperate all at once. Elias squeezed back, though doubt gnawed at him like the dogs gnawed at the air. The swamp whispered around them, alive with unseen eyes and hidden paths. Behind them the barking grew louder. The hunt had begun. Dawn did not arrive gently. It crept in like an enemy, pale and unforgiving, lifting the darkness that had hidden them and exposing the swamp inch by inch. Elias woke to pain first. It pulsed through his ankle with every heartbeat, a deep grinding ache that told him something inside was wrong. He did not move at once. He listened. Years of forced stillness had taught him that waking too fast could be fatal. Water lapped softly against roots. Insects buzzed. Somewhere far off a bird cried. No voices, no dogs. Yet. Beside him Mara slept curled into herself, her hair plastered to her face with dried mud and rain. One hand was still wrapped around his sleeve as if she had never let go. Her jaw was set even in sleep, as though she were bracing for another blow. Elias slowly sat up. The world tilted, then steadied. He tested his ankle with careful pressure. Fire shot up his leg, sharp and punishing. He bit down on the inside of his cheek to keep from making a sound. They had run too far, too fast. He knew that now. The swamp had saved them for the night, but daylight belonged to men with guns. He scanned their surroundings. They had collapsed beneath a massive cypress whose roots rose like walls from the water, creating a pocket of shadow even in morning light. Mud clung to everything. Their footprints were gone, swallowed by water and time. That was good. What was not good was the faint, distant sound drifting through the trees. A horn. Elias froze. It came again, closer this time. Long. Low. Answered by another from a different direction. They were organizing. He shook Mara gently. "Wake up." Her eyes snapped open instantly, sharp and alert, fear already burning there. She did not ask questions. She listened. The horn sounded again. Then voices, shouting, calling names, giving orders. Dogs barked, restrained but eager. Mara swallowed. "How many?" Elias shook his head. "More than last night." They moved slowly, carefully. Elias tore a strip from his already ruined shirt and wrapped it tightly around his ankle, knotting it with shaking fingers. It would not heal it, but it might keep him moving. Mara watched his face. "Can you walk?" "Yes," he said, because there was no other answer. They slipped deeper into the swamp, keeping low, stepping where water was deepest to mask scent and sound. Mara took the lead now, testing ground ahead with a branch, her movements quick and instinctive. Elias followed, forcing his body to obey him. As the sun rose, the swamp came alive in a way that made Elias uneasy. Sounds multiplied. Birds burst from branches. Creatures slid into water with soft plops that made his heart race every time. Every shadow looked like a man, every ripple like a dog's snout breaking the surface. By mid-morning they reached firmer ground, a narrow stretch of land where moss-covered trees grew closer together. Elias knew this place. He had worked nearby once hauling timber. There was an abandoned hunting shack not far from here, used years ago by white men who no longer came this deep. They found it half-collapsed, roof sagging, walls swallowed by vines. Inside it stank of rot and old animal droppings, but it offered cover. They crouched in the dark, listening. The voices were clearer now. Split into lines. Dogs from the west. Dead overseer. The words struck Elias like blows. Dead overseer. There it was, confirmation. Whatever mercy might have existed was gone now. Mara's hands trembled. "They killed Jonah after we left." Elias nodded slowly. He had known, but knowing did not soften the pain. Jonah's stories, Jonah's quiet hope, all ended in mud and blood. "They'll bring everyone," Mara said, "won't they?" Yes. By noon riders would come from neighboring plantations. By evening men from the towns. Bounty hunters would smell opportunity the way dogs smelled fear. Elias closed his eyes briefly, forcing his thoughts into order. Panic was useless. Panic got people caught. "We can't stay here," he whispered. "They'll search every structure." Mara nodded. Then where? Elias thought of rivers, of moving water that confused dogs. He thought of old routes used to smuggle goods. He thought of Jonah's whispers about a crossing near the bend of the Tallahatchie, where currents split and rejoined like braided rope. We head north, he said, but not straight. We make them think we're going east. Mara frowned. How? Elias met her eyes. We leave signs. They worked quickly. Elias scraped his knife against bark, leaving fresh marks pointing east. Mara tore cloth and snagged it deliberately on thorns. They even left shallow footprints in drying mud, obvious and careless. Then they doubled back through water, wading upstream, forcing themselves against the current until their legs burned. The dogs found the false trail within an hour. Elias and Mara heard the explosion of barking, the excited shouts, the thundering of boots moving fast and confident in the wrong direction. Relief washed through Elias, thin and fragile. It did not last. By afternoon they reached the river. It was wider than Elias remembered, swollen with recent rain, brown and fast-moving. The current pulled at fallen branches and carried them away without effort. Mara stared at it. If we cross here— We don't, Elias said. Not yet. They moved along the bank, keeping to cover, watching as men arrived in waves. They counted more than Elias could easily process. Dozens of riders, trackers with dogs, men carrying rifles and ropes. Some wore uniforms from old wars. Others looked like farmers eager for blood money. A bounty poster flapped against a tree, freshly nailed. Elias crept close enough to read, 2 runaways. Siblings. Dead or alive, the reward amount made his stomach twist. It was more money than either of them could imagine holding. Enough to buy loyalty. Enough to turn neighbors into traitors. Mara tore the poster down and shredded it silently, her hands vicious. They think they own us, she whispered. They think they can buy us, Elias said. As evening approached, the hunters changed tactics. They spread out, forming long lines, moving methodically. Dogs were sent ahead, then pulled back, then released again. Nets were discussed. Boats were prepared. Elias realized with a cold certainty that this was no longer just a chase, it was a campaign. They moved again under cover of dusk, skirting the edge of the hunters' perimeter. Elias's ankle screamed with every step, his vision blurring at times, but he did not slow. He could not afford to. At one point, Mara stopped suddenly and grabbed his arm. Ahead, 2 hunters stood near the riverbank, laughing, their rifles resting against a tree. A dog lay between them, panting. There was no path around. Mara looked at Elias, eyes asking a question she did not dare speak. Elias's mind raced. Fight? Run? Both felt like death. He spotted a fallen log upstream, half submerged, water rushing loudly over it. Noise. Distraction. He picked up a rock and hurled it into the river far to the left. It struck water with a loud splash. The dog's head snapped up. The men turned, cursing, grabbing their rifles. Elias and Mara slipped into the water on the opposite side, moving low and slow, the cold biting into their bones. They did not breathe until they were far downstream, hidden by reeds. When they finally crawled onto land again, night had fully fallen. Fires dotted the distance like angry stars. The sound of voices never stopped now. Men shouting, dogs barking, horns calling. Mara collapsed beside Elias, chest heaving. They're everywhere. Yes, Elias said quietly. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the blood seeping through his makeshift bandage. You can't keep this up. I can, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Mara shook her head. We need another plan. Elias stared into the darkness, listening to the hunters who believed numbers guaranteed victory. He thought of Jonah, of the overseer's lifeless eyes, of the bounty that had turned the world into a net. We stop running blind, he said slowly. We make the land work for us. Mara's breathing steadied. Her fear sharpened into something else, something dangerous. How? She asked. Elias looked at the swamp, at the river, at the men who thought they were prey. We turn them around, he said. One by one. A scream echoed suddenly from somewhere to the south. High, panicked, cut short, then shouting, confusion, angry voices arguing over directions. Mara's eyes widened. That wasn't us. Elias listened carefully, heart pounding. Someone else had fallen into the trap of the night, and for the first time since the horn had sounded, Elias felt something stir beneath his fear, not hope, control. The hunters moved faster now, rushing toward the disturbance, lines breaking, discipline slipping. Dogs barked wildly, unsure which scent to follow. Elias pulled Mara close. Remember this, he whispered. They bleed too, they get lost, they make mistakes. The night swallowed them as they moved again, deeper into shadow, while behind them the great hunt began to fracture, and though the bounty was high and the numbers overwhelming, the land itself seemed to shift, as if deciding which side it belonged to. Night thickened around the swamp like a living thing, heavy and breathing. The fires of the hunters burned brighter now, scattered and uneven, no longer forming neat lines but broken clusters of light and noise. Shouts overlapped. Orders contradicted each other. Somewhere a man cursed loudly about a missing dog. Elias and Mara watched from a rise of tangled roots and reeds. their bodies pressed low, barely daring to breathe. The scream they had heard earlier echoed again in Elias's mind, not in sound but in consequence. One mistake, one man separated, and suddenly the hunters were no longer a single force. "They're rushing," Mara whispered. "They think it's us." Elias shook his head slightly. "They don't think, they react." He studied the movement carefully. A group of 5 had broken off toward the south, guns raised, dogs pulling hard on leashes. Another cluster moved west, arguing loudly. Lanterns bobbed and collided as men bumped into one another in the dark. Too many men, too much confidence, too little patience. Elias felt the land beneath them in a way he never had before. Not just mud and water but memory. He had worked this swamp, hauled timber here. Nearly drowned here once as a boy when an overseer pushed him too close to deep water for moving too slowly. He knew where the ground gave way, where roots caught ankles, where snakes nested and men panicked. Mara watched him, reading his face. "You're thinking," she said. "Yes. That scares me more than when you're quiet." He gave a faint, grim smile. "It should." They waited until a cluster of lanterns moved past them, close enough that Elias could hear breath, smell sweat and tobacco. One man laughed nervously, trying to sound brave. Another snapped at him to shut up. When the lights faded, Elias motioned Mara forward. They moved in a slow arc, not away from the hunters but around them. It felt wrong at first. Every instinct screamed to put distance between themselves and danger, but Elias knew distance meant nothing if the trail stayed hot. Confusion was safer than speed now. They reached a stretch where the swamp narrowed into a crooked channel. Water flowed fast here, choked with fallen branches and slick stones beneath the surface. Elias stopped. "This is where we begin," he whispered. Mara's eyes scanned the darkness. "Begin what?" "Teaching them to be afraid." He slipped into the water, without waiting for her answer, wincing as cold seized his ankle. He forced himself to move naturally, letting pain fade into background noise. Mara followed, teeth clenched, breath shallow. They waded upstream for several minutes, careful to keep to deeper water. Then Elias stopped beneath an overhanging tree whose roots twisted down into the channel like claws. He crouched and began to work. Using his knife, he loosened a long, rotten branch, wedged between stones, testing it until it shifted under pressure. He wedged it back just enough to hold, then scattered leaves and debris over the surface of the water to hide the disturbance. Mara watched, understanding dawning slowly. "Someone steps there, they go under," Elias finished. "Hard, fast. And if they can swim?" Elias looked at the current. "They'll panic first." They set 3 such traps along the channel, each subtle, each deadly in its own way. Then Elias took out the last of their cloth scraps and tied them to low branches near the waterline. Faint, almost invisible markers that would catch lantern light and draw attention. Bait. By the time the dogs arrived, Elias and Mara were already gone, circling back through higher ground, hiding their tracks in leaf litter and mud. The dogs hit the channel just after midnight. The barking changed immediately, excited, sharp, pulling handlers forward. Lanterns flared brighter. Men shouted encouragement. Then came the splash. A sudden, violent crash of water followed by a scream of pure shock. "Hold him!" someone yelled. Another splash, another shout, this one cut off abruptly. Chaos erupted. Dogs barked wildly, unsure where to go. Lanterns dropped, light spinning crazily. A man fired his gun into the darkness, the sound deafening in the confined space. Elias and Mara listened from a distance, hearts pounding, as fear did what guns and numbers could not. One hunter did not surface at all. Another was dragged out coughing, choking, his rifle lost to the current, his leg bent at an angle it should not. "They did this," someone shouted. "They planned this." "No," another voice snapped, trembling. "This place is cursed." The word spread faster than Elias expected. Cursed. Mara pressed her forehead briefly to the earth, breathing hard, not in fear now, but in something dangerously close to exhilaration. "They're breaking," she whispered. "They're human," Elias said. "That's all." But even as he spoke, his ankle buckled beneath him, pain roaring back with renewed fury. He stumbled, catching himself against a tree. Mara was at his side instantly. "You're getting worse." "We can't keep this up forever." Elias nodded. He had known that since dawn. Every step was a debt he would have to pay. They moved again, slower now, keeping to shadows while the hunters regrouped. Arguments flared openly. Elias could hear them even from a distance. Accusations of incompetence, shouts about lost men, demands for more light, more dogs. A single horn sounded, then stopped abruptly, as if whoever blew it had thought better. By early morning the swamp felt tense in a new way. Not loud, not frantic, but wary. The hunters no longer charged blindly. They moved cautiously, probing, poking at the darkness with sticks and gun barrels. That caution saved some of them. It did not save all. Near dawn, Elias spotted 2 men moving together along a narrow ridge of dry ground away from the others. They whispered urgently, glancing over their shoulders. One carried a lantern, the other dragged a dog that seemed reluctant to move forward. Mara looked at Elias, question in her eyes. Elias hesitated. This was not part of any plan. He had not intended to confront anyone directly, but the land offered an opportunity. He gestured for Mara to follow, keeping wide, silent. They moved ahead of the hunters, cutting through thick brush until they reached a stretch of ground riddled with sinkholes, soft patches hidden beneath layers of leaves and moss. Elias crouched and pressed lightly with his foot. The ground gave slightly. "This one," he whispered. They scattered leaves carefully, disguising the weakness, then slipped away, hearts racing. Minutes later, the lantern appeared. The men argued quietly. "I don't like this," one muttered. "Dog's acting strange." "You want the money or not?" the other snapped. "Keep moving." The next sound was a dull, wet collapse and a scream that tore through the trees. The lantern vanished instantly, swallowed by the earth. The dog barked frantically, leash snapping tight. The second man stumbled back, tripped over a root, and fired blindly into the air. Elias and Mara did not stay to watch. By the time the sun crept up again, pale and weak through the mist, the swamp was littered with panic. One man missing. Another injured. Another refusing to go forward without backup. Dogs confused, handlers shaken, and rumors. "They're leading us. They know the ground better than we do. They're not just running." Elias listened as they hid beneath thick brush on a low hill overlooking the chaos. His ankle throbbed relentlessly now, swelling so badly he could barely fit his hand around it. Mara knelt beside him, jaw tight. "You can't walk much longer." Elias exhaled slowly. "Then we change the rules again." She stared at him. "How?" "We make them think we're more than two," he explained quickly, quietly. "Split paths, false signs, noises at night, appearances and disappearances timed just right. They already believe we're ghosts," he said. "We let that belief grow." Mara considered it, then nodded once. "I can do that." "I know." They separated for the first time since the escape. Not far, never far. But enough. Mara moved fast, fearless, snapping branches, whispering just loud enough to be heard, darting between trees like a shadow that refused to settle. Elias stayed back, slower, more deliberate, leaving careful signs that contradicted hers. The hunters chased both. By midday they were arguing openly again. "There were two, no, three. I saw a woman. No, I heard a man behind me." The bounty posters flapped uselessly in the breeze, mocking their certainty. But victory carried its own danger. As the sun climbed higher, Elias felt his strength fading. His vision blurred, sweat soaked his clothes despite the cool air. He sank against a tree, breath ragged. Mara found him minutes later, eyes wide with fear she tried to hide. "Elias." "I'm here," he said weakly. "You're bleeding." He looked down. Blood seeped through the bandage again, dark and steady. Mara swallowed hard. "We need to stop." Elias shook his head. "If we stop, they catch us." Her hands clenched. "Then what do we do?" Elias stared north toward the unseen river bends, toward the stories Jonah used to tell in whispers. "We survive today," he said. "Then we disappear tomorrow." Behind them, a horn sounded again, shorter this time, sharper, a signal. Mara stiffened. "What does that mean?" Elias listened, dread crawling up his spine. "It means," he said slowly, "they've learned something new." The swamp fell quiet, as if holding its breath, and somewhere among the hunters a plan was forming, one that would not rely on fear or confusion but on cruelty. The hunt was changing, and the margin for error was gone. The horn's sharp call faded, but the silence it left behind was heavier than any noise that had come before. Elias felt it in his bones before he understood it with his mind. The swamp, so loud with insects, birds, and restless water, had gone unnaturally still. Even the hunters' voices dropped to murmurs. Whatever they had learned, it had tightened them, pulled them into something colder and more deliberate. Mara crouched beside Elias, her hand hovering near his shoulder as if afraid to touch him and make him break. "What changed?" she whispered. Elias listened harder, not just for sound but for rhythm, movement, intention. "They stopped chasing shadows," he said quietly. "Now they're hunting people." As if to confirm it, a voice carried through the trees, loud, clear, practiced. "Spread wide, burn anything they could hide in, push north, no gaps." Mara's breath caught. "They'll burn the swamp." "Not all of it," Elias said, "just enough." Smoke began to creep through the trees, thin at first, then thicker, carrying the sharp, bitter scent of burning brush. Flames crackled somewhere to the south, followed by the pop of wet wood catching reluctantly. The hunters had grown tired of being afraid. Fear had failed them. So they reached for something older and crueler. Control. "We have to move," Mara said. Elias tried to stand. Pain detonated through his leg. White flashed across his vision, and he went down hard, catching himself on his hands in the mud. His body shook uncontrollably. Mara was at his side instantly. "Elias, don't." He gritted his teeth and pushed himself upright again, swaying. "I can walk." "You can't," she said, her voice breaking despite her effort to keep it steady. Smoke thickened, curling low to the ground, stealing breath. Shouts rose again, closer now. Men moved in lines, forcing the land to give them what patience could not. Elias looked at Mara, really looked at her. Mud-streaked face, eyes sharp with terror and defiance. The sister who had followed him into the dark without hesitation, the thought formed fully before he wanted it to. "No," Mara said immediately, reading his expression. "Don't even think it. We don't have a choice." "Yes, we do. We stay together." "If we stay together," Elias said softly, "we both get caught." Mara shook her head violently. "You don't know that." "I do." He grabbed her wrist, not hard but firm enough that she felt the truth in his grip. "Listen to me. They're pushing north. That's where they think we're going. They'll tighten the net there. If they find us together, it's over." Her eyes burned. "Then we break through." "With what?" Elias asked gently. "My broken leg?" Silence stretched between them, filled with smoke and distant shouting. Elias swallowed. "You have to go east, loud, fast. Make them see you." Mara stared at him as if he had struck her. "And you?" "I go west," he said, slow, quiet. "I disappear." "No," she whispered. "I won't leave you." Elias cupped her face with muddy hands. "Mara, you don't leave me. You save us." Her breath shuddered. "They'll kill you. Not if they don't find me." Smoke rolled closer now, stinging eyes, tightening chests. Flames crackled loudly enough to be heard through the trees. The swamp hissed as fire met water. Mara's jaw clenched. Tears streaked clean lines through the grime on her cheeks. "If they catch you, they won't," Elias said, though he did not believe it entirely. "And if they do, you keep going, you don't look back." She pulled away from him, shaking her head, fists clenched at her sides. "Jonah said families survive by staying together." Elias smiled sadly. "Jonah also said freedom asks for everything." A shout rang out dangerously close. Lantern light flickered through smoke not 50 yards away. There was no more time. Elias pressed something into Mara's hand, his knife, the only weapon they had left. "You'll need this more than I will." She tried to give it back. He closed her fingers around it. "Mara," he said, his voice low and steady despite the chaos closing in. "I need you to run like you've never run before. Make them chase you. Make them believe you're all they have left." Her chest heaved. "And you?" "I'll give them nothing." Another shout, another order. Boots splashed through shallow water. Mara leaned forward suddenly and pressed her forehead against his. For a heartbeat the world shrank to just the two of them, siblings bound by blood and terror and love fierce enough to break hearts. "Live," she whispered. Elias nodded. "You too." Then she turned and ran. She did not move quietly now. She crashed through brush, snapped branches, shouted wordless cries into the smoke-filled air. She ran east, exactly as Elias had told her, drawing attention like a thrown torch. Hunters shouted instantly. "There, I see her." Dogs barked wildly, lunging forward. The net shifted. Elias forced himself the opposite direction, west, dragging his useless leg behind him, every movement agony. He stayed low, slipping into water where he could, pressing his body into mud and reeds, letting smoke cover his scent. He heard the pursuit pull away. Boots, dogs, voices, all following Mara. Good, he thought dimly. Too good, because the hunters were not fools. A new voice rose above the others, calm and commanding. "Half of you keep pushing east. The rest sweep west. Slow and tight. She's a distraction." Elias's heart sank. They were learning. Smoke thickened until breathing became painful. Elias coughed silently, chest burning. He slid into a deeper pool and submerged himself up to his chin, using a fallen log for cover. Water cooled his skin, dulled the pain in his ankle just enough to keep him conscious. Above him, boots passed close enough that he could see mud drip from them into the water. A man's voice snarled, "I smell blood." Another replied, "That's the swamp." "No," the first said, "that's a wounded man." Elias closed his eyes. The dogs arrived moments later. They were different dogs than before, leaner, quieter, trained not to bark but to signal. One of them stopped abruptly, head lifting, nose twitching. Elias slowly sank lower, holding his breath, water closing over his mouth, then his nose. His lungs screamed. His heart pounded so hard he was sure it would betray him. The dog whined softly. A handler knelt, peering into the water. "Here," he said. "Something's here." A stick jabbed into the pool, missing Elias's head by inches. Mud clouded the water. Another jab, another. Elias stayed still, body screaming, vision dimming at the edges. Then, a sudden shout from the east, a gunshot. Then two more. "Move," someone yelled. "They're trying to break through." The handler cursed. "Damn it, pull the dogs, we're needed east." The stick withdrew. Footsteps retreated. Elias burst from the water, gasping silently, dragging himself deeper into cover as fast as his ruined body allowed. He lay shaking beneath tangled roots, lungs burning, tears streaming uncontrollably down his face. Not from pain, but from the knowledge that Mara was out there, alone, being hunted by dozens of men. Time blurred. Smoke came and went in waves. Fire moved past him, then away. He lost track of hours, drifting in and out of consciousness, waking each time pain flared or voices drew too close. At some point rain began again, light at first, then heavier, hissing against embers, dampening the worst of the flames. The swamp, stubborn and ancient, refused to burn completely. As night fell again, the hunters regrouped. Elias heard them talking nearby, their confidence returning. "She ran hard," one said, "but she'll tire. We've got her cornered near the ridge. And the brother," a pause, "he's hurt, he won't get far." Elias pressed his face into the mud to muffle a sound that might have been a sob. Mara was the trap now. He forced himself to think, to plan, to do the one thing he had always been good at. Wait. When the camp settled into uneasy rest, fires burning low, guards posted lazily, Elias began to move again. Every inch forward felt like dragging a knife through his leg, but he moved anyway, toward the voices, toward the danger, toward his sister. Near midnight, he saw the glow of lanterns clustered too tightly, heard raised voices arguing. "She doubled back. No, she didn't. I saw her tracks." Then a cry, a woman's cry, sharp and furious, not afraid. "Mara!" Elias's heart nearly stopped. He crawled closer, ignoring pain, ignoring everything but that sound. Through brush and smoke he saw them. Mara stood knee-deep in water, surrounded on three sides by hunters, her chest heaving, eyes blazing in the lantern light. One dog lunged, snapping at her leg, held back barely by its handler. "Drop the knife," a man ordered. "It's over," Mara laughed, a wild, broken sound. "You needed 100 men for 2 of us," she said. "What does that make you?" Anger flared. A man stepped forward. Elias knew what was coming. He grabbed a rock with trembling hands and hurled it with everything he had left. It struck a lantern dead on. Flame exploded outward. Men shouted in surprise. The dog broke free, lunging, not at Mara but at the chaos. Mara moved instantly, slashing the knife across a man's arm, kicking free, plunging into deeper water. Gunshots rang out. Bullets tore through trees and water. Someone screamed. Elias dragged himself back into the darkness as fast as he could, heart pounding with terror and fierce, aching pride. Behind him the swamp erupted again into confusion and fury. The hunters had blood on their hands now, and they were angrier than ever. But the night had proven one thing beyond doubt. Even wounded, even divided, the siblings were still not caught, and the hunt, far from ending, had become something personal, something vicious. By dawn there would be no mercy left on either side. Dawn crept in reluctantly, as if even the sun feared what it might reveal. Mist clung to the swamp in heavy sheets, blurring shapes and swallowing distance. Smoke from the night's chaos still lingered low to the ground, mixing with fog until the air tasted bitter and damp. The hunters moved through it like ghosts themselves now. Slow, tense, eyes darting, fingers never far from triggers. They were no longer shouting. That frightened Elias more than anything else. He lay hidden beneath a mat of reeds and fallen branches, his body half submerged in cold water that numbed everything except the pain in his ankle. It had swollen grotesquely, the skin stretched tight and hot beneath the water's chill. Every pulse sent a spike of agony through his leg, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he was still alive. Mara was alive too. He held on to that thought like a prayer. The memory of her laughter, wild, defiant, thrown like a blade into the hunters' faces, replayed again and again in his mind. She had escaped that circle. He had seen it. He had to believe she was still moving. The hunters, however, believed differently. "Blood trail ends here," a man said nearby, his voice muffled by fog. Another answered, low and grim. "Then she's hurt. Bad. Good," Elias thought. Let them believe that. Boots splashed closer. Elias pressed himself deeper into the muck, slowing his breathing, letting the swamp claim him. A dog sniffed at the air, whining softly. "Easy," the handler murmured. "She's not far." She. Always she now. Elias understood what had happened. The night's chaos had rewritten the story in the hunters' minds. Mara was no longer bait or distraction. She was the threat, the dangerous one. The knife, the defiant voice, he was the afterthought. A wounded man would crawl only so far. That assumption was the only thing keeping him alive. The hunters moved on, drawn by a faint trail of disturbed water and snapped reeds that Mara had left deliberately this time. Signs meant to be seen, meant to pull eyes and dogs northward toward higher ground. Hours passed. Elias counted them by the way light shifted through the fog and by the slow creep of exhaustion trying to drag him into sleep. He did not let it. Sleep meant vulnerability. Sleep meant death. By mid-morning, the sounds of pursuit had moved farther away. Not gone, never gone, but stretched thin across miles of swamp and forest. Elias began to move. He dragged himself onto firmer ground inch by inch, using roots and low branches to pull his weight. Each movement was a negotiation with pain. His breath came in shallow gasps, his vision swimming at the edges. He had no destination yet, only a direction, northwest, away from Mara's trail, away from the hunter's focus, toward places Jonah had spoken of only once, in a whisper years ago. Old crossings, forgotten paths, land that confused maps and men alike. By noon, hunger gnawed at him viciously. He had eaten nothing since before the escape. His mouth was dry, tongue thick. He found a patch of wild berries growing low to the ground and ate carefully, checking each one for bitterness. He drank rainwater pooled in leaves, filtering it through cloth. Survival had become mechanical, each action deliberate, each mistake potentially final. As the day wore on, Elias began to hear fewer voices. The swamp felt vast again, breathing, alive. Birds returned cautiously, insects buzzed, life, indifferent to human cruelty, resumed. Then he heard shouting again, distant, angry, triumphant. A horn sounded, short, sharp. They had found something. Elias froze, heart hammering. Another horn answered. Then another, not scattered. Coordinated, his worst fear clawed its way into his chest. They had caught Mara. He waited, forcing himself not to move, not to panic. Minutes dragged past. The shouting did not turn into celebration. There were no cheers, no gunshots fired into the air. Instead, voices rose in argument. She was here. No, she wasn't. These tracks are fresh. Then where is she? Confusion again. Anger layered on top of it. Elias exhaled shakily. They had found signs, not her. Mara was still running. Still fighting. The knowledge filled him with equal parts relief and terror. She could not keep this up forever. Neither could he. By late afternoon, the hunters made a decision that would change everything. Elias heard it before he understood it. Wagons, the creak of wheels, the groan of wood under weight. They were bringing supplies deeper into the swamp. Nets, chains, extra dogs, men rotating in shifts. They were settling in. This was no longer a chase measured in hours or days. They were prepared to wait. Elias knew what that meant. If the hunt became a siege, the land would eventually betray them both. Hunger, injury, exhaustion. One misstep, he needed to end this, not by escaping farther, by disappearing completely. As night fell, Elias reached the edge of a narrow river branch that fed into the larger waters Jonah had once described. It flowed deceptively calm, dark and deep, its surface broken only by drifting leaves and the occasional ripple of something alive beneath. He watched it for a long time. Water was both enemy and ally. It stole strength, it hid scent, it erased tracks, and sometimes it lied. Elias began to prepare. He found a place where the bank dropped steeply into deep water. Nearby, a fallen tree extended partway across the river, its trunk slick and half-rotted. He moved carefully, setting his plan piece by piece. First, he tore his remaining cloth into long strips and soaked them in blood from his reopened ankle wound, squeezing until dizziness threatened to take him. Then he dragged himself along the riverbank, smearing blood deliberately on rocks and roots, leaving an obvious, desperate trail. He staggered visibly, letting branches snap loudly, letting his pain show in his movements. He wanted to be seen. When he heard voices approaching, he did not hide. He stumbled into view of the riverbank, collapsed to his knees and cried out, a raw, broken sound that carried across the water. "Over there!" a hunter shouted. "I see him!" Dogs barked wildly. Elias dragged himself toward the fallen tree, leaving blood everywhere, sobbing, gasping, playing the part they expected. "Don't let him reach the water!" someone yelled. Too late. Elias hurled himself into the river. The cold stole his breath instantly. Pain exploded through his leg as water rushed over him. He flailed visibly, arms thrashing, head breaking the surface once, twice. Hunters reached the bank, lanterns flaring. "He's drowning! I told you he wouldn't get far!" Elias let himself sink, not straight down, diagonally, slipping beneath the fallen tree, letting the current carry him under the trunk where the water was deepest and darkest. He held his breath until his chest screamed, then forced himself to remain still as his body was dragged along the bottom. Above him, chaos erupted. He went under. There, no, there. A dog leapt into the water, barking frantically. Another followed. Then came the moment Elias had prepared for. A body surfaced downstream, not his. The hunters gasped as it rolled weakly with the current, snagging against roots near the bend. Lantern light revealed a soaked, bloodied form tangled in cloth. Shirt, pants, limbs limp and unmoving. Elias had weighted it carefully. Stones knotted into cloth, just enough to sink, then rise again when the current shifted. "It's him," someone said, certainty thick in their voice. They dragged the body onto the bank, turned it over. The face was unrecognizable, smashed by rocks, distorted by water and impact. A man swore softly. Another crossed himself. "Well?" someone asked. A pause. "He's dead," the leader said finally. "Broke his neck, looks like. River did the rest." Relief washed through the group like a tide. One man laughed shakily. "Damn fool tried to swim." Another spat. "At least one of them's done." They did not look back at the river again. Elias lay wedged beneath the submerged roots farther downstream, lungs burning, body trembling violently as the hunters' voices faded. He did not move for a long time. When he finally crawled out of the water hours later, the moon was high and bright, silvering the swamp. His body shook uncontrollably. His ankle was numb, purple-black and swollen beyond recognition, but he was alive. and as far as the hunters were concerned, he was dead. Elias laughed then, silently, the sound tearing itself from his chest in broken bursts. It was not joy, it was release, it was disbelief. He had vanished, the hunt would change again now. Not end, but fracture, because there was still Mara. By morning, word would spread through the camps the brother was dead. The river had claimed him, and with that belief would come mistakes, carelessness, overconfidence. Elias rested his forehead against the cool earth and whispered her name into the night. Mara. He would find her not as prey, but as something the hunters would never see coming. As dawn approached, fog thickened once more, rolling across the swamp like a curtain being drawn. The stage was set for the final lie, and the impossible escape was not yet finished. Morning did not arrive with light so much as with rumor. The news moved faster than the sun, slipping through camps and across waterlogged trails. Carried on breath and certainty, the brother was dead. Drowned. Broken by the river. The swamp had taken its due, men repeated it until it hardened into truth. By the time fog thinned and birds dared to sing again, the hunt had changed shape. Fires burned lower, guards slouched, dogs lay panting, tongues lolling, handlers less attentive. A victory, small, imperfect, but enough, had softened the edges of urgency. Only one target remained. Mara. She knew the moment the story reached her. She was crouched beneath a cedar thicket on a rise of firm ground, knees drawn to her chest, breath measured. The night had left her scraped and shaking but alive. She had not slept. Sleep was for people who could afford to be still. Voices drifted up the slope, men talking openly now, careless in their confidence. River took him. Shame, really. Girls still out there. Mara pressed her fist to her mouth to keep the sound inside. Grief came like a wave, sudden and suffocating, dragging images of Elias's face to the surface. His careful eyes, his steady hands, the way he listened before he spoke. Dead, the word burned. She tasted iron. Then something else cut through the pain, sharp and clear as a blade finding bone. Elias did not die quietly. He did not drown flailing like a panicked animal. If the hunters believed he was dead, it was because he wanted them to. Mara's breath steadied. Her tears dried. Good, she thought. Then we finish this. She waited until the men moved on, then slipped down slope and into water, moving with the confidence of someone who had learned to read currents and shadows. She did not run now. Running made noise. Running left panic behind. She hunted the gaps. By midday the camps had reorganized. Leaders conferred. Men argued about routes and credit. The bounty posters, creased, muddy, flapping loose, were amended with charcoal marks. One name crossed out, the reward halved. Men noticed. Disappointment settled in. Not fear now. Frustration. Greed unmet. That was when mistakes began. A lone hunter strayed from his pair to relieve himself near a thicket. He never returned. The dog he'd left tied whimpered until someone cut it free. They found the man hours later with his throat opened cleanly, his eyes wide in disbelief. No tracks led away. Another group followed a set of footprints into a stretch of ground that looked solid and wasn't. One man sank to his waist and panicked, dragging the others off balance. They got him out swearing and shaken, but the trail vanished as if it had never existed. She's toying with us, someone muttered. By dusk, the whispers returned. Not curses this time, but uncertainty. She's not running anymore. She's watching. Night fell thick and warm. The swamp-breathed Mara moved like a rumor made flesh. She let herself be seen at the edge of lantern light, then gone. She snapped branches to draw men toward dead ends. She whistled low and sharp from one direction, then answered herself from another, just loud enough to stir unease. She did not kill again. She did not need to. Fear did the work. Far from the camps, beyond a bend where the water braided and rejoined, Elias lay hidden beneath a collapsed bank, wrapped in wet leaves and patience. He had crawled there before dawn, every inch earned in pain. His ankle had swollen beyond recognition, purple and hot. The skin stretched until it shone. He could not stand. He could barely sit. But he could listen, and he could think. He heard the rumor reach the edges of the hunt. He heard the tone change. He heard the hunters relax, and then stiffen again as something began to move against them. He smiled without humor. When night deepened and the moon climbed high, Elias began the last piece. He waited until voices drifted close, until two men argued near the waterline, their lanterns swinging lazily between them. I'm telling you, she was here. You're chasing ghosts. Elias reached down into the water and nudged a branch loose, letting it drift with the current until it brushed against the roots where the men stood. The lantern dipped, light flashed. One man cursed and stepped back. Careful, the other said. River's tricky. A splash followed, a sudden yelp. Damn it, my boot! Elias slipped beneath the surface and pushed with what strength he had left, guiding the current, pressing the branch against the man's leg just long enough to tangle him. Panic did the rest. The second man lunged to help and slipped too, both of them floundering, shouting. The noise brought others running. Lanterns flared. Orders barked. By the time they dragged the men free, soaked and furious, Elias was gone, his presence reduced to confusion and cold water. He did not do it again. Once was enough. The idea mattered more than the act. By morning, the leaders were exhausted. Their men were restless. Dogs were confused. No clean trail held for long. The swamp seemed to rearrange itself overnight, and always there was the sense of being watched. On the third day after Elias's death, a decision was made. They would end it. They would draw her out with certainty. They took a man from the edge of the hunt, someone known to have helped runaways before, and tied him to a tree near the river bend, in plain sight. They let word slip. They let it travel. "She won't leave him," one leader said confidently. "She's already shown what she is." Mara heard the word by noon. She found the man before dusk, bound, bloodied, eyes swollen shut. He did not beg. He only whispered when she cut the rope. "They're waiting." "I know," she said. She led him away from the bend, into water that masked their tracks, into shadow that swallowed sound. She did not hurry. Hurrying made patterns. When the trap sprang and found nothing, tempers broke, men shouted. A dog lunged and was struck. Someone fired into the trees. Another man turned on his leader, screaming about wasted time and broken promises. That night the hunt fractured. Small groups peeled away, convinced the girl had slipped past them. Others refused to move without daylight. The leaders argued bitterly over strategy and blame. And somewhere in that unraveling, Mara disappeared, not with a splash or a scream. With absence, Elias waited until the arguing grew distant, until the night took on the deep quiet of a thing finally settling. Then he dragged himself from his hiding place and began the slow, brutal journey toward the bend Jonah had once described in a whisper. He did not know if Mara would come. He only knew she would know. The bend lay where the river split around a stand of ancient trees whose roots formed a natural wall, water flowing deep and dark on one side, shallow and broken on the other. It was a place that confused sound and hid movement, where fog lingered even at noon. Elias reached it at dawn. He collapsed against a root, breath coming in ragged pulls, vision blurring. He pressed his forehead to the bark and closed his eyes, listening for footsteps that did not come. Time passed. He drifted. Then, soft, deliberate movement, not careless, not rushed. A shadow separated from shadow. "Mara," he whispered, not daring to open his eyes. Her hand found his face, trembling, real. "You're dead," she said, a laugh and a sob tangled together. "I saw them take the body." He smiled weakly. "I know." She knelt beside him, her hands moving quickly now, checking his ankle, his ribs, his face. "You're hurt." "I'm alive." She bowed her head and pressed her forehead to his shoulder, breathing him in as if afraid he might vanish again. He held her as best he could, his arms weak but certain. They did not speak for a long moment. When they did, it was practical. "We can't stay," Mara said. "I know. They're pulling back." "I know." "North," she said. "Past the bend." Elias nodded. "Not the way they expect." They moved at dusk, using the shallow side of the river to erase themselves, stepping where water broke and reformed, where the land could not remember them. Elias leaned heavily on Mara, pain a constant, but the rhythm steadied him. They crossed at a place no map marked and left no sign behind. By morning, the camps were half empty. Men argued over payment, over credit, over whether to keep going. Some refused to enter the swamp again. Others claimed the girl had crossed into another county. A few swore she had never been there at all. The posters were taken down. Weeks passed. Stories replaced certainty. Some said 2 siblings had crossed the river and vanished into free soil. Others claimed the brother's ghost walked the bend, luring hunters into water that swallowed them whole. Plantation owners complained of missing dogs, of men who refused jobs near the swamp. Fear changed sides, and somewhere north of the river, beyond the reach of names and numbers, 2 siblings rested beneath a sky that did not belong to anyone else. They did not speak of bounties. They did not speak of hunters. They spoke of roads and seasons and the sound of water when it finally runs behind you instead of ahead. No one ever proved where they went. Only that 100 men had failed, and the land remembered who listened to it,